The Board of Education for December 15th, 2020 is called to order. For tonight's meeting, any item that will be voted on has been posted on the PPS website under the Board and Meetings tabs. This meeting is being streamed live on PPS TV Services website and on Channel 28 and will be replayed throughout the next 2 weeks. Please check the district website for replay times. Welcome to this meeting of the board. We begin with the consent agenda. Board members, if there are any items you would like to pull, we will set those aside for discussion and vote at the end of the meeting. But first of all, Ms. Bradshaw, are there any changes to the consent agenda?
There was a revision that was uploaded to the website earlier today, but none since then.
So we out to soon. Board members, are there any items you would like to pull from the consent agenda?
I have 3 comments to make, but nothing to pull.
Great. I'm sorry. I was frozen there.
I was frozen?
I think our chair might be frozen.
There she went. Scott, this is your moment.
Seize power.
back.
Seize power.
All right, Julia, go ahead.
Would you want to get it under consideration, moved and seconded, and then
Did you want to pull something from the consent agenda before we move?
Sorry, what you missed is I said I had 3 comments, but I don't have anything to pull.
Okay. Does anybody else have anything they would like to pull? Okay, let's go ahead with a motion on the consent agenda. Do I have a motion and second to adopt the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All right, Director Constam moves and Director Brim Edwards seconds the adoption of the consent agenda. Julia, what comments / questions did you have?
Yeah, so on resolution 6214, which is our expenditure contracts, we have a number of legal contracts that appear to be, while they're vendors that we use, they appear to be sort of the start of new contracts. And I'd just like to add it when we have our mid-year or the next quarterly reporting that we get sort of the annualized summary for these vendors, given that there's more expenditures for these law firms than is represented on this. So just to get an accurate snapshot of our spend with these particular law firms. And then second, on resolution 6218, I had a question for the record and I think it's been responded to. So thank you, staff. And then on resolution 6217, I know we've had a discussion about this already before, but I just want to acknowledge the work of staff to find a good solution to and home for access. That was more than a year-long process and not easy. So, kudos to all the staff and the work that went into that to find a good solution for the access students and families and to reunite the 2 campuses.
Great. Is there any other board discussion on the consent agenda? All right, we will, Ms. Bradshaw, is there any public comment?
No.
All right. The board will now vote on resolutions 6214, 6215, 6217, and 6218. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
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 Yes. All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Are there any abstentions? The consent agenda is approved by a vote of 7-0 with Student Representative Shu voting
yes.
All right, thank you, everyone. We turn now to our time of student and public comment. Before we begin, I would like to review our guidelines for comment. The board thanks the community for taking the time to attend this meeting and provide your comments. Public input informs our work, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts, reflections, and concerns. I think Director Brim Edwards just alluded to that as she talked about the work that went into reunifying access. Our responsibility as a board is to actively listen. Our board office may follow up on board-related issues raised during public testimony. We do request that complaints about individual employees be directed to the superintendent's office as a personnel matter and not be the subject of public comment. If you have additional materials or items you would like to provide to the board or superintendent, we ask that you email them to publiccomment@pps.net. Again, that's public comment, all one word, @pps.net. Please make sure when you begin your comment that you clearly state your name and spell your last name. You'll have 3 minutes to speak, and you will hear a sound after the 3 minutes, which means it is time to conclude your comments. Ms. Bradshaw, who do we have signed up for student hour public comment tonight?
We do not have any public comment tonight.
No students either? Okay. Well, I guess we will hear from students as we move on now to Student Representative Shu. And Nathaniel, would you like to provide us with your report this evening?
I would, thank you. Wasn't expecting to go so soon. This is weird. Anyway, for us seniors, the horrendous college application process drags on, meaning that I am still exceedingly preoccupied. However, as this is our last meeting of 2020, I am hopeful that this will no longer be the case the next time we meet in January. During last meeting's rather rushed report, I had mentioned that the DSC, whose full name, by the way, is the District Student Council, not the District's Student Advisory Council, has been functioning as a more cohesive and effective body lately. In the interest of transparency, I would like to take tonight as an opportunity to elaborate on what this has meant for us as an organization. To begin with, we have, for the first time since our creation, approved bylaws, as is our right and duty under our board policy. These bylaws, which we intend to be but a first draft of many, cover topics from the types of DSC meetings to meeting rules to the DSC voting and quorum. We have also, as of tonight, voted to form our first 3 formal subcommittees: the policy subcommittee, which will be tasked with managing the ongoing efforts to amend our board policy; the bylaws subcommittee, which will be tasked with refining and expanding on our bylaws; and the intergovernmental subcommittee, which will focus on expanding intergovernmental and interorganizational student voice. The first 2 shall exist until their respective goals have been accomplished, and the last one will be a standing subcommittee. In addition, we have scheduled our own DSC retreat for early January, during which time we hope to address various pending matters and plan for the rest of the year. One notable topic at this retreat will be planning for our annual PPS Student Summit, including deciding what form it might take given the challenges of the pandemic. Furthermore, we recently held an election for the position of Deputy Student Rep, the winner of which was Jackson Weinberg of Cleveland, with whom I look forward to working with more closely this year. And finally, we have, for the first time since our creation, achieved a representative from every comprehensive high school in the district, a number of whom were elected by their student bodies. While we currently lack representation from the alternative schools, I am hopeful that this can be addressed in the not too distant future. And thank you, that concludes for tonight.
Nathaniel, this is Director Constam. I just want to congratulate you and the rest of the DSC for getting through those processes of making sure you had a representative from each high school. That's been surprisingly challenging for the student reps who have come before you, and I think it makes a huge difference. So it's really exciting to see how robust all your processes are becoming for the DSC, and we know it's going to improve all of our collective work by having such good participation on your side. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Student Representative Shu. Superintendent Guerrero, are you ready with your report for us tonight?
Yes, Chair. Good evening, directors. Buenas tardes to everybody listening on this, our last regular meeting of 2020, actually. I have a few slides for you. We want to make sure we get the children on screen. But I do want to begin with a quick recap of our COVID-19 related event last evening. We had a panel presentation to the board by regional and national public health experts, along with representatives of district stakeholder groups, including students, parents, educators, and community-based partners. And in just over 2 hours, our panelists covered a number of pandemic-related topics. I particularly appreciated that our pediatric public health experts from Children's National Hospital in Washington, D.C. described many of the health and safety issues and factors and other complexities that school districts everywhere are facing as they contemplate reopening. Dr. Joelle Simpson, next slide, one of the medical experts shared, I cannot tell you how much I realized that planning for a hospital system paled in comparison to what you have to deal with in trying to keep schools safe for kids. That was her commentary after her continued work with us, because in fact, this is complex. No one wants to reopen schools more than we do, and we continue to work as we have for many months on the now, providing comprehensive distance learning and addressing students' basic needs, while at the same time beginning to contemplate the future, a future we hope is not too far away, when we can welcome all students back into their schools. So I'd like to reiterate something that one of our directors brought up last evening. When the day comes that we do reopen schools, our sites cannot be merely a return to the past, to the normal at that time. We'll have to focus on the overall educational recovery. That'll require some adaptability, some innovation, some flexibility, both in remediating for the impact of this pandemic, as well as addressing opportunity gaps that existed before we shut down, while we attend to those academic and social emotional needs that our students have. It's why we went to the community over a year's time, helping us to develop our aspirational vision. It's why we are working right now, even during this pandemic, to develop a multi-year strategic plan, which will begin to articulate a blueprint for how we will actualize our graduate portrait, our educator essentials, our educational system shifts that are going to be necessary to realize our vision. So I want to thank the many teachers, staff, and students who have been participating in related focus groups recently. We look forward to providing the board with an upcoming update on our progress in developing our strategic plan and how these prioritized action steps that emerge will in fact seek to inform our budget development process. As a reminder, we already have evidence of how we're prioritizing resources. For instance, the student investment account funding, for instance, as we remain committed to our theory of action, and we're pleased to hear that it looks like that will be more fully funded for the coming fiscal year. So I'm grateful for the board's support as we work hard at being better and continue our journey of transformation here in the Portland Public Schools. So even during this pandemic, we remain optimistic about our future. And if you missed last evening's event, it is posted now on our YouTube channel. And if the panel did not cover a question that you have, please visit pps.net. You will find a banner on our district homepage linking you to our question and comment form, which we will keep open for another day for families, students, and others who wish to make their voice heard. So my sincere gratitude to all of our panelists from yesterday evening for sharing their time and their expertise, not just yesterday evening, but throughout this crisis, and to the staff who put the event together, and to our directors for your continued interest, for your good questions, for listening to the kind of critically important information necessary for us to be aware of as we navigate the operation of our school system during this pandemic. Following this regular meeting of the board, we have another one of our study sessions later this evening with a robust update on health education in the school district. I want to acknowledge that we're coming close to perhaps the most challenging calendar year many of us have experienced. This pandemic has exacerbated societal gaps in access to support of all kinds, including access to basic needs. And I'm proud of our work since March in addressing many of those needs and in delivering instruction in a way and at a scale that we've never had to do before. So there are thousands of PPS professionals who have worked countless hours for 9 straight months. And as we close out this calendar year and head into a well-deserved winter break, I'd like to acknowledge the hardworking individuals who comprise PPS. I'm constantly inspired by our educators who continue to show extraordinary flexibility, creativity, and patience. Here in this photo, it shows a typical morning at the home of Ashley White. She's a paraeducator at our Dart School. She's sitting here with her twin daughters, who are Vernon first graders, who've set up shop with her and are learning while she lesson plans. I'm grateful for our school leaders and administrators for their tireless work in supporting our school communities and operating in an unprecedented situation since this past March. And I'm grateful for our custodians, facilities, safety teams, transportation, and nutrition service workers who haven't stopped working, and many others whose dedication has helped maintain lifelines to those we serve. I'm also appreciative of our families who've endured so much. Thank you for your understanding and generosity, as many of you have had your roles as parents and caregivers redefined since last spring. And I'm awed most by our students. Their brilliance is always what motivates us. We recognize that this has been challenging, that they've continued to demonstrate perseverance and determination in the midst of this pandemic, a reckoning on racial justice, and through this disruption to their learning, to their social activities, their school customs and traditions. Pardon me. And as always, our students give us hope. This particular slide shows the choirs at Cleveland High School, who combined, put together their first digitally produced song called Secret for the Mad. During the process, students examined mental health, how to talk about it and support each other, and ways music can play a role in helping us through this challenging time. You might have noticed my recent social media posts highlighting students from many other schools coming together and in the midst of all to perform music together. So to our talented students at Cleveland and everywhere, thank you for lifting us all up. And I'd like to take a minute or so just to highlight their impressive performance. So here you go, directors.
Little things, all the stereotypes, they're gonna help you get through this one night. And there will be a day when you can say you're okay in the end. Ooh, I promise you, it will all make sense again. Ooh, promise you, it will all make sense again. Promise you, it will all make sense again.
Thank you to our talented students of Cleveland High School. This year has not been easy for any of us. To everyone in our PPS community, thank you. My wish is that you can find some moments of peace and restoration during this winter break. We all deserve to exhale a bit. And that concludes my remarks, directors.
Thank you, Superintendent Guerrero, for that. A very lovely piece from the Cleveland Choir there, and so much going on. I know that I deeply appreciated the work with our experts yesterday, and thank you for helping lead that. We turn now to our committee and conference reports, and I'm just going to run through the alphabetical list of the committees. And so if you don't have a report, you can just say you don't have a report. But I know there's been a lot going on since our last board meeting. So Audit Committee, do you have anything to report?
We're going to be covering it later in the meeting, so I'll pass.
Thanks, Julia. All right, Bond Committee, Director DePass.
Yeah, we had the BAC report. We started the meeting off that way. Also heard the OSM Office of, I forget the acronym, Office of School Improvement quarterly report, an update. We got a promise, a commitment to share a bond execution plan at some point in the future when that's better developed. I'm really excited that we also are replacing, we have an outgoing bond accountability chair. And knowing that he was leaving, we developed a recruitment process. Through that recruitment process, we got 14 applicants, which is a lot. Those are 14 people that are committed to working with us, volunteering. I'm really excited to share, and we'll share in more detail in January, but through that recruitment process, our staff is recommending the 4 applicants out of the 14. 3 of them are women. 3 of them are under 50, 2 of them are under 35, 2 identify as African American. We have an expert in the tech space that can help us as we talk about tech improvements for the bond. One of them is a disability advocate. So through the process of doing this recruitment, asking them to voluntarily share their gender identity, their race, their age, we got a really diverse pool of talented people. I'm really excited to be sharing that later in the month with you all. And we'll be appointing them hopefully in our first meeting in January. And I believe that's it.
Thank you, Director DePass. All right, our next committee is the CBRC.
Thank you. We have the December CBRC meeting tomorrow evening between 6 and 7. It's Google Meet. And on the agenda is the PPS 5-year forecast, which the board looked at earlier this evening. The first quarter financial reporting and benchmarking, and finally confirming dates and topics for future CBRC meetings. That's it.
All right, Charter and Alternative Programs, Director Constam.
We have not met since my last report.
Okay. Intergovernmental Committee.
We'll be approving or considering the legislative agenda later on in today's meeting.
Okay. And did you want to say about the word about the elections piece that's going to come before us in January, or do you want to save that?
Oh, great. Yeah, no, it's funny. We had talked about that, huh? No, I will mostly save that, but we will be back in January. So if I was ready 2 weeks ago, Chair Lowry.
I know, I'm sorry.
In January, we are going to schedule a discussion about school board elections and whether we want to make changes based on recent state legislation and overall based on the idea that at-large elections can be problematic. And so we want to sort of take a look at our elections and how we do them and whether we want to make changes to that. So a robust conversation coming in January.
And I know one of the things we're talking about is the fact that we have a predominantly white board, and maybe the way we're elected is a systemic issue in why our boards have not been more diverse in the past, now or in the past. So thank you for helping us lead some of that work. All right, Policy Committee, we're back to Director Moore again.
So we had a meeting on December 7th, last Monday. We looked at the suicide prevention policy, which we'll be putting out for a first reading later on this evening. We talked about some new revisions to the real estate policy. We talked about the anti-racist learning communities policy draft, which is our response to the legislation that all districts should have a policy under the category of all students belong, addressing harassment, racism, discriminatory behavior in schools. We also had a preliminary, fairly long preliminary discussion of the climate crisis response policy draft. The next meeting will be January 4th, and a lot of these topics, with the exception of suicide prevention, will be carried over to the next meeting. That's it.
All right, thank you, Director Moore. We go now to the Rose Quarter. Is there any update, Director Bailey or Director Brim Edwards?
We can tag team, Director Bailey. We had a meeting on Monday, and much of the meeting was focused on the highway covers and also public comment related to the project. There was a request in addition by one of the committee members for sort of deeper engagement with PPS and our concerns with the project, so that we don't get too far down the road on the project without our issues being surfaced. And that was Nate McCoy. So Courtney Wessling, who's the PPS staffer, teaming with me on the executive steering committee, and I are going to talk to ODOT about how we can make that happen, because very clearly the project is moving, and we need to get a placeholder at least for a side conversation. We're certainly not the driver of the whole project, but to have be able to have a conversation about the interests we have related to Tubman. Director Bailey, do you have anything to add?
No, I wasn't at that meeting. It's just hard for me to imagine us telling them anything that we haven't told them in the past, but there you go.
All right. Thank you very much, both of you, for that work. Director Bailey and Director Moore, anything from the Southeast Guiding Coalition that we need to be updated on?
Yes, the coalition has been doing great, challenging work, meeting on a weekly basis, and also a number of members working between meetings with the goal of coming out of the meeting on Thursday with a consensus decision on feeder patterns for Kellogg. So stay tuned, fingers crossed that we come out with something that's receives broad support from committee members that we will consider in January.
All right, and any other committees or conference reports that we have not gotten to? Anything from Council of Great City Schools or OSBA or anything else we need to share? All right, Michelle, I'm having a hard time because you talked about the bond execution plan, and I just got execution plan in my head and was like, I don't know, I went down a rabbit hole of like, you know, firing squad and all sorts of funny things. So it's weird the way language sometimes pulls at us, but I'm very intrigued about the bond execution plan, which I think is more about getting the bond done than any of the where I went. Thank you all for your time and for your reports tonight on your committee work. It is always really intriguing to hear all the various aspects of our board work. All right, we are moving to our regular update on the COVID-19 metrics. And so Superintendent Guerrero, would you like to present this agenda item?
I'd like to present our Chief Assistant Performance, Dr. Russell Brown. As you know, we've all been tracking the trends with COVID here in Oregon, but Russell has the latest update for us here.
So good evening, Chair Lowry, members of the board, Superintendent Guerrero, and members of the community. Pleased to join you again this evening to give an update on on the metrics. You'll see that this is dated based on the metrics through last week. We had an update yesterday as well, and I'll articulate that in a moment. Next slide, please. So pleased to say that we've seen our case rates, the blue line there, begin to plateau a little bit. And that slight downward trend is continued into this week as well. But yet, as you can see, we are well above that threshold for considering a transition away from CDL or the inclusion of any other limited in-person activities at this point in time. Next slide, please. So as expected, our case rates have gone up since October. We fully anticipated that. Back in October, we were seeing about 140 cases over 2 weeks. As of last week, the plateau was around 538 cases over 2 weeks. Yesterday's update had it at 498.2. Again, about twice the rate that would be necessary to be looking at a transition period. Test positivity had stayed level at 8.2%. It has dropped this week to 7.2%. Again, cautionary tale because we still have 2 major holidays and where we expect that a number of folks will travel and have gatherings despite advice not to do so. So again, would lean back into the importance of our basic protective actions, you know, wearing face masks, maintaining 6 foot of physical distance between one another, and rigorous hand washing to help stay the course of this as we move forward. And again, in light of what we heard from Dr. Graven yesterday, unfortunately, we can anticipate the numbers to continue to remain rather high for the foreseeable future at this point in time. That is, next slide, please. That summarizes the update for this time. And again, we provide 2 links for members of the board and the community if you want to keep updated with the information that's in this report and to be able to monitor as we move forward. Thank you again for your time.
All right, thank you, Dr. Brown. Our next agenda item is the acceptance of the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, also known as the CAFR, and I did not know that's what it stood for. Reports to the management and the report on requirements for federal awards. So Director Brim-Edwards, as chair of the audit committee, would you like to introduce this item?
Thank you. So at the December 2nd audit committee meeting, the audit committee heard from Tim Gillette and Jason Romney of Talbot, Corvola, and Warwick, or TKW. We had the presentation on the CAFR, the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, along with the reports to management and reports on the requirements of the Single Audit Act of School District Number 1. We'll let Tim and Jason provide the overview, but just to, I guess, the headline from the audit committee was just another year of excellent work by the internal PPS team led by Tracy Pinder. And so, you know, a year in which we had an unmodified opinion, and it's the type of long, lengthy report you want to read and find nothing surprising. That's always good when something's coming out of the audit committee. The audit committee, after hearing the presentation and some questions and discussion, voted to recommend the Board of Education accept the CAFR, the report to management, and the report on requirements for single audit. And I will flag before we hear the presentation from the TKW team that when we get to the resolution, I have a small amendment to the resolution language to just eliminate the words "and approve." So we just accept, but we don't approve. So when we get to that point, I'll make a motion to amend the resolution. But with that, I think I'm turning it back to Superintendent Guerrero or Claire Hertz, the Deputy Superintendent, who, you know, another year of great results from Claire's team as well.
Thank you, Director Brim Edwards. You took the words right out of my mouth. Thank you for recognizing the accomplishment here on behalf of our budget and finance team. And we do have some distinguished individuals with us this evening. We have the president of the Association of School Business Officials International, otherwise known as Deputy Superintendent Hertz. And I know that we have both Tim Gillette and Jason Romney from TKW, Talbot, Corvilla Warwick accounting firm. So we're glad to have you this evening, and we like to get these kinds of reports.
Good evening, Board of Directors. We are so pleased to present the third year in a row of a clean audit with no findings. Major shout out to the finance team and how much they have produced, and really, especially figuring out a paperless office in a finance area and all working from home. They really have shown all year long, and Tracy Pender and her leadership really shines in the outcome of this CAFR. It shows it. And TKW is a great partner. Their high bar pushes us towards excellence. So with that, I know that Tim Gillette and Jason Romney are here to present the report. Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot, Claire. Appreciate that introduction. I'm Tim Gillette. I'm a partner with Talbot, Corvilla, and Warwick, usually just called TKW. I'm here with my manager, Jason Romney, to present the comprehensive annual financial report for the district. We've already gone over this with the audit committee, so I will go pretty quickly, and always happy to take questions or slow down, but I think quick is probably appreciated in this regard. I think as you've already heard, it is a clean audit report, what we call an unmodified opinion is the official term. So we, in our opinion, the financial statements fairly present the position of the district. The comprehensive annual report is a huge document. If you aren't going to read all of it, I would recommend you read the management's discussion and analysis, which gives some good background information and some comparative information and is a good overview for the CAFR. What else? Our part of this is really pretty small. The real credit goes to Claire and Tracy and Cheryl and Melissa and everybody else who's involved in helping with the financial statements. So a big pat on the back for them. As Claire mentioned, it's the third year with no single audit findings, which is the important thing that you want to hear about. And it has not always been that way for the district. There were a number of years ago where there were a number of findings. So this is a good result. And besides our opinion on the financial statements, we also issue a report in accordance with Oregon minimum standards. The state requires us to look at things, and there are a couple of things in there you may want to look at, but nothing that I would call too serious. And then, as I've already referred to, what they call the single audit, what the federal government requires us to look at if you spend over $750,000 in federal funds, which obviously the district does. And that's a place where we look at a number of different things as prescribed by the federal government. And again, it came out clean, no findings. So great work on the district's behalf. So again, happy to take questions.
Are there any questions from board members at this time?
Can I just point out that I believe the last time we had an audit with findings was 4 years ago. And as I recall, they were pretty significant findings. Claire has been here for the last 3 years, and all 3 years have been clean. I think it speaks to her leadership as deputy superintendent and her ability to recruit and keep a talented team, finance team that is all over everything. They've done a great job. Thank you.
Important point, Rita, I echo that.
And as the outside auditors, we would agree with that as well. Especially this year with all of the challenges of the pandemic and the changes that have occurred in our society with remote work and remote auditing for that matter. It's been an interesting year for everyone. And I think the district can be proud of what they've done.
Any other comments or questions? All right, thank you so much, Mr. Gillette. We now are going to bring forward the resolution 6219, and we'll bring that forward. And then Director Brim-Edwards, you said you had an amendment to this resolution. So we now bring forward resolution 6219, acceptance of the comprehensive annual financial report, reports to management, and the report on requirements for federal awards. Do I have a motion and a second?
So moved.
Is there a second out there for me?
Second.
All right, so Director Brim-Edwards moves and Director Constam seconds the adoption of resolution 6219. Is there any board discussion, Director Brim-Edwards?
Yes, I would like to offer an amendment that strikes the words in the first sentence of the resolution, the words "and approves." So the sentence would then read, "The Board of Education accepts the comprehensive annual financial report," on and on.
Okay. All right, do I have a second of that amendment?
Second.
All right, Director Brim-Edwards moves the amendment and Director Bailey seconds. Is there any discussion on the amendment?
Could I just get a little rationale for the removal? Is that consistent with past language, or I'm just curious?
It is that we don't traditionally approve an audit. We accept it.
And that's true of the CAFR as well, in terms of prior years. Okay, thank you.
And in fact, the resolution's name is acceptance of. Or what?
Besides, the audit committee only recommended accepting, no approving.
Any further discussion on the amendment? All right, all in favor of the amendment, please indicate so by saying yes.
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 Yes, all opposed, please indicate by saying no. Any abstentions? The amendment passes 7-0 with Student Representative Shu voting.
Yes.
All right, now we move on to the discussion of the resolution as a whole. Is there further board discussion? Ms. Bradshaw, is there any public comment?
No.
All right, the board will now vote on resolution 6219 as amended. Acceptance of the comprehensive annual financial report, reports to management, and the report on requirements for federal awards. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Are there any abstentions? Resolution 6219 is approved by a vote of 7-0 with Student Representative Shu voting.
Yes.
Thank you, Nathaniel. All right, we move now to our school renaming process agenda item. Superintendent Guerrero, would you like to introduce this next item?
I would, but first I'd be remiss if I didn't say, well done, Claire Hertz, for your leadership, and kudos to your team. I agree with the directors. This has been a great track record during this administration to reset and be prudent public servants, stewards of our resources. So thank you for your work. So under renaming, as I shared with directors earlier this summer, I tasked our senior advisor on racial equity and social justice, Danny Ledesma, to establish a renaming and redefining committee co-facilitated with PPS students to design a set of recommendations to improve our administrative directive and procedures for naming buildings. This renaming and redefining committee will utilize a racial equity design process to evaluate the current administrative directive and suggest improvements in alignment with RESJ. So tonight, we're hearing an update from Director of Engagement, Shanice Clark, on the work of the committee, and Danny Ledesma regarding the work of the committee as well. So you have the two of them here.
Thank you, Superintendent. Good evening, Chair Lowry and directors. As the superintendent said, my name is Danny Ledesma, and I'm the advisor on racial equity. And tonight I'm going to reintroduce, kind of jog everyone's memory about this item. And then the fabulous Shanice Clark is going to sort of give you all the details about the work that we've been engaged in. So I don't know if you remember, but it was actually July 15th when the last time I was before you talking about the naming and defining places work. And if you'll remember, in July, we were right in the midst of the pandemic, but also our community, our country was in the midst of significant protests around a racial reckoning. And our community was really in a place of discomfort. And you heard from several of our community members, from parents, from students, about how important it was for our students of color to feel a sense of belonging, for their identities to be affirmed while they were in schools. And you heard a lot of testimony about how noxious some of the names and the places that we were venerating through history have been, and what the impact could be. And so when we came here, you were so good and continue to be really so supportive when we asked you not to jump to the fix, not to sort of take the testimony and sort of immediately start to sort of move into a place of fixing stuff, but rather to sit in the discomfort, to encourage us to think about how we can take a moment and reflect and think about how we can make sure that in trying to make changes and trying to make improvement that was really aligned to our vision and to our core values around racial equity and social justice. And so in doing so, we proposed a naming and defining places process. And as you'll recall, this process is hopefully aligned to our vision. And so if we go to the next slide, you've seen this slide before. What we endeavor to do is to make sure that as we think about ways to reimagine and change the student experience at PPS, that we make sure that it's always aligned with the vision. And as you know, our community adopted this vision over 2 years ago. And in every element of the vision, from our core value of racial equity and social justice to our graduate portrait, our educator essentials, and our educational system shifts, the value and the importance of racial equity and social justice we heard loud and clear from teachers, from students, from parents, from community members, how important it is that this gets woven through all that we do at PPS. And so what we wanted to do in the naming and defining places is to really think about how not only to think about the veneration that happens in a name, but to really think about how we change the student experience so that students can really sort of see and experience all the ways that our core values, the graduate portrait, the elements of our vision, the way that they come alive. So as you recall, we have a racial equity framework and plan. If we go to the next slide, one of the things that we wanted to do with the naming process is make sure that it was tied to this framework and plan. You can see this on our website, but in the framework and plan, we have 5 goal areas. And we thought that this connection through student-led initiatives, RESJ goals, as well as teaching and learning RESJ goals, that this is a way that we could really tether any type of renaming to the work, the core work that we're doing at PPS. So we looked at the goals in the framework and plan around student voice, around student identity development affirmation, and looked at curriculum and instruction, and wanted to take a more holistic way, a holistic approach in the way that we were trying to move this work. As you also know, in our next slide, we have a theory of action that really supports our approach of targeted universalism. If you go to the next slide, if you're quizzing yourself, if you remember the theory of action. Our theory of action is targeted universalism in action, right? If we really look to the places where our system or our district, where students of color experience the most barriers, and if we attend to folks who are experiencing those barriers, then in fact we can build a stronger district. And our theory of action basically restates that if we really think about how to employ and execute racial equity and social justice strategies into the core work that we do of instruction with students, teachers, and the curriculum, then we can build not only organizational culture, but organizational capacity, or that extra muscle, to be able to create that foundation to support every student, but particularly our Black and Native American students. So this work, if we're going to think about student experience, really has to be grounded in the experiences of our Black and Native students. And so you'll notice that some of the work that we're doing really attends to what are we trying to say about the terrible legacy of slavery, of genocide, of colonization in our country, and how do we make sure that in our naming process, in our ways that we're trying to think about things, that we really pay special attention to giving our students, our educators, our community members the education and the tools to be able to understand why certain names or why certain histories are problematic. Which links to our next slide, please, which is wanting to make sure that this is all tied into our approach to teaching and learning, which is to be culturally responsive or to be culturally sustaining, and to make sure that that pedagogy is there. So the naming process really leans into two key elements of culturally responsive pedagogy and critical race theory. The first is really in the naming process, wanting to make sure that we don't just change a name, but that we're really thinking about how curriculum, how instruction, how the student experience includes a disruption of ideas where Eurocentric or middle class culture is really normed, and instead really understand that there's a much bigger and deeper history and culture, and wanting to really honor and respect the diversity of our communities here in Portland. The other piece is in critical race theory is that we want to make sure that we're aligning this to the act of counter storytelling, and making sure that the stories of our BIPOC students, our Black and our Indigenous and students of colors and family and community can really be told. And in doing that, that can really be a way to counteract the racial inequities and to really sustain a movement for racial justice in our district and in our community, which I think if you reflect back on all of the summer and into the fall of protest, of sort of how important counter storytelling can be, particularly in giving voice to our students and making sure that our students are really centered in all of our decision making. So the one last thing I will say, if we go to the next slide, is that our approach to racial equity and social justice has three sort of prongs, right? We want to make sure that we're doing all that we can to really sort of make sure that individuals are ready, and that we're raising the consciousness and giving individuals throughout the system, whether it's students or teachers or principals or leaders, that we're really sort of focusing in on that growth that needs to happen at the individual level. but we're not stopping at that individual, but we're and sort of jumping to systems change, but really attending to a different organizational culture. What are the unwritten norms and behaviors and agreements that really make up a culture of learning, a culture where we are really dedicated to continuous improvement, grounded in our ideals around racial equity and social justice? And how do we attend to and really feed the culture, a positive and transformational culture, so that we can, in fact, not only build our capacity or our muscles, but really disrupt oppression and oppression where it shows up in our system, so that we really are building a district that lives up to our ideals. So in telling you this sort of approach of organizational development, we wanted you to see how this shows up in some of the work. And so I'm so excited to introduce one of our area senior directors, Stephen Stapleton, who has been just a really great member on our committee. He brings a lot of experience and practice in some of the work that he's done before he came to PPS in the great state of Texas. It's been really a delight to be able to work with Stephen. He's brought a lot of positive and really positive energy and productive energy to the group. So Stephen's going to talk a little bit about how this approach is sort of coming to life in our planning process.
Thank you, Danny, for that. And thank you, Shanice, also. And looking at, the organizational culture, I think, if we look at number one, and regardless of renaming schools, is solidifying into this naming and defining places toolkit into regular practice of the school, of learning about the school. There's a lot of history, and as Danny mentioned earlier, honoring and respecting our communities. And while those communities may change, I think in the process of counter storytelling is lifting up the voices of our students, especially our BIPOC students, and how they become a part of the legacy of their school, how they become a part of the traditions and the culture, and define that for them and make them feel included. And work that I've led in the past, when we've talked to students and done similar empathy interviews as Shanice has, our students really talk about feeling part of something. And even though the yearbooks that they studied didn't look like, the people in the yearbooks didn't look like them, they still felt connected and understood the school. And I think that sense of belonging is important, especially now, whenever a lot of students may not feel that they do belong. And so I'm really excited to be part of this work. Thank you, Danny.
Thank you, Danny and Stephen. I can take it from here. My name is Shanice Clark, for the record, and good evening, folks, Superintendent and Board of Education. We can move to the next slide, and I'm going to just talk a little bit about our process that has kind of multiple strands, but we're really focusing on building these transformative and humanizing experiences that couple culture change with name change. And so our committee is at the initial phases of exploring that, in addition to our case studies that we'll have time to hear more about, especially as we continue. And on our next slide, I will have an opportunity to get a little background, but things that you've seen before. I know as an educational organization where we are preparing students to lead change in concert with our demands and a responsibility to dismantle systems of oppression. We are really approaching this analysis of naming our buildings and spaces by ensuring a few key things. And that is really, in addition to what you've heard earlier, this commitment to racial equity and social justice and the perspectives, viewpoints, tensions, and ideas that folks have to bring to the center of our work, having a place for that discourse. And I know our administrative directive is going to have an opportunity in the future to really apply racial equity through this community design process. where we acknowledge how we go about these power constructs, looking at name change. And as Stephen mentioned, a toolkit is going to be this support mechanism that will also be in addition to some of the procedures that we're thinking about that will help folks overall across the district be able to engage in this work. But ultimately, really strengthening our processes and approaches so young people at the center, especially with our broader community, have the critical knowledge and capacity to really understand, interpret, and analyze their school issues and how they impact their identity and school culture. And on our next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about a place that we've landed, especially as racial equity and social justice is really fueling the way we look at the process to be able to have conversations in space, acknowledging every student and every student experience. Culturally responsive pedagogy is really something that informs this work. And student empathy interviews were mentioned on the previous slide or on slide 6, but is really something that we looked at with the support of our core team to model culturally responsive design method, ensuring, we build that relational trust, focus on human values, and embrace complexities as we think about renaming. So this is where we are in the initial stages, and we have this criteria that we will help sample and identify reflective, really, of our community created vision and our framework. But this criteria listed will really drive the lens that we bring to decision making and policy making and change making, right, for school communities overall. And so looking at this lens to be applied in both practice and procedure and in the actual selection of a name. And so I'd love to also have Ernie Guerrero, our director of Open School Step Up, who's also a member of our core team, talk a little bit about the value of this process, especially as it impacts students throughout our system.
Thanks, Janice and Danny, Chair Lowry and directors and some familiar faces. It's good to be in space with you. I just wanted to share kind of a perspective as a partner, the director of the Step Up program for Open School, and we've been in partnership with the district for now 17 years. And my place here tonight is really is a place of gratitude and appreciation for the process. Step Up works in 3 high schools right now. We serve 400 students, a little over 400 students right now. 85% of them are BIPOC students. 75% of our staff at Step Up are BIPOC. So I feel as a representative on the committee that the district and the work of this group is reaching out to bring perspectives both within like Step Up and also partners that are very familiar with students and families that are in the schools and in the school spaces. There's another piece to this that has just been really just rewarding to be a part of, and that's just seeing how student-centered this process has been. There's a committee that's working on, we're working on the administrative directive and looking at that sort of context from that piece, and also hearing from representatives from Wilson and Madison at the work they're doing on the ground. And really the students work, a lot of the students' work on the ground is going to be really driving a lot of how we work together in shaping directive and the toolkit and just the ideation that's coming through from a lot of their work in concert with the committee's work. I was intrigued and surprised at how quickly the group developed trust and transparency between all three folks working together. And just kind of lastly, this is important work, and this is bold work, and this is work that not every district is jumping into right at the minute. And I just wanted to share some gratitude and just appreciation for stepping into this work and supporting it, and knowing that and respecting the importance of this work that's in front of us. So thanks for some time here. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Ernie, for joining us tonight and talking a little bit about, how this really impacts your experience serving students across our system. And a little on our next slide, we'll reflect on the committee still and the charge, but really have a group of folks, students, community members, and folks from our school leadership to help grapple with this charge to design these recommendations in support of our case studies that are on the ground right now at Madison and Wilson. And so we have an opportunity to learn a lot from our folks at both processes, but more so are trying to build a system that is responsive to the needs and resources that are most responsive to what students are asking of adults in our system. So our charge is here, and I know we will have many more school communities in the future that will be exploring this process and will be in support of this good work that we're setting up to frame. And the next slide, we will talk a little bit about the phases. We in total have about 5 phases, and in our first, we're taking the opportunity to digest what it is we needed to accomplish and review the resources we had available to us, and talk a little bit about culturally responsive design and that idea of empathy interviews as a mechanism to practice and pilot what that could look like for folks in our general process. So our case study phase is really beginning to take a deeper dive at potential issues and solutions on the horizon for Wilson and Madison's name recommendation that is to come. And in our third phase, we are really looking at the solutions that are coming to the surface and trying to make a plan for them with beginning to draft and revise practices and protocols. And I mentioned the toolkit as something we want to also be able to add. On our next slide, we're gonna just talk a little bit about the last 2 phases, continuing our draft changes and changes to practice, and hoping to finalize by March of 2021. And we'll have an opportunity to review, develop, and really further analyze the recurrent process that we put in place from the administrative directive. So that's a little bit about the phases, and on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about what this means for us currently. And so I mentioned a little bit about this already, so no surprises here, but we are really feeling ready as a core group in terms of identifying what core steps or needs exist to do this work. And so have been able to begin exploring and ideating different pathways in response of the case study learnings from Madison and Wilson. And so we have a toolkit and resource guide that is to come, but on our next slide, we'll have an opportunity to stay connected as both Madison and Wilson are sifting with community feedback from both students, parents, and members of the greater community with school-based committees that have been meeting weekly. And so I know we're right at the nexus of figuring out what might work best for both school communities. And in January, hope to have a picture of when a final name will be presented. But we will be continuing to provide support to both communities, in addition to giving a deeper analysis on this process that will ultimately help reinforce technical supports that help our schools be able to do this work that centers students and our vision and commitment to racial equity and social justice. And so with that being said, that concludes the update for the evening. And we have some time for, I think, a couple of questions and appreciate your time tonight.
Great. I know that Superintendent Guerrero wanted to make a comment before we get to questions.
Why don't we finish the board's questions related to this presentation? And then if you would indulge me, please.
Perfect. That sounds great. I'm happy to indulge you whenever. All right, so questions for the team.
I have a question if I can. Well, first, thanks to the team for really putting students at the center. I think that's always what makes sustainable change, even change that may seem like it will be hard for some segments of the community to accept. But I think when we have students at the center, we can't miss. So thank you for that. And also explaining the process. I think the work on the AD will perhaps be as important as the naming processes. I'm curious, I had some visibility to the Franklin mascot renaming process 2 years ago and how the committee worked. I thought they had a process that engaged at one point the whole school community. And I'm curious what that will look like for, say, students or community members who aren't on the committee in terms of when it moves to a recommendation. And wondering if you just could share that. And then I guess the second question I would have is, when it comes to, or is there some other transition or steps in the process?
Danny?
It looks like you're muted, Danny.
Oh, sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Director Brim-Edwards. So I think the purpose of both the toolkit and the changes to the administrative directive would be to not only sort of think about how to standardize some of the sort of engagement pieces of name changes, but also to give some sort of hands-on resources so that folks can do that really well. For a huge school-wide process that also engages community members and potentially partners, want to make sure that we are giving folks the tools and the support that they need to do that. So look for more of that to come. I think what we've heard from both the committee and from some of the empathy interviews is how important it is to make sure that as many diverse and multiple perspectives are heard. And then the second part of your question was about the timing for the upcoming changes. Is that correct?
You know, I was also trying to figure, is there going to be a recommendation come and then there be some other steps, or is it when it gets advanced to the board, that's the final step? Just
Yeah, so for the naming for both Madison and Wilson, they are operating under the current administrative director and the policy that's set up. So there will be a name that comes up for vote, and we will continue to update you beforehand. Also want to sort of point out that you can go to our website, and there's a page on the website that has the sort of like up-to-date sort of where they are in the process. And so both Wilson and Madison have had some sort of pushback in their process to allow for more engagement. So I believe mid-January is when at least one of the schools might be ready to propose some names. They're still in process.
Thank you.
Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate, well, thanks for all the work. And I appreciate that this is specifically being structured as a learning process for how we go forward, how we learn, how we do better, and build that in as we go along. And I know when we talked about, well, tonight and both previously, as to how this can be a learning process for the community. We've been getting letters from alumni, both pro, yes, change the name, con, how dare you. How do we engage all parties in that, at that look at history? That discussion of, you know, how dare we judge past practices with today's views? Well, yeah, we can and we will, but having that discussion, engaging alumni with students in respectful process that you know, affirms everybody. So I just want to ask, in particular with these two current processes, can you tell me more about how that's been a part of the process?
Well, so I guess before, and Shanice can give us more information about the current processes, but what I would say is that they are sort of operating under sort of like as is. They are case study. And so what we're trying to do is reimagine a process that is a little bit more inclusive and sort of takes into account sort of is more clear about sort of the alignment between the direction and the vision of PPS and sort of how then we apply a racial equity lens to history, and particularly how that might have an implication on naming. I think that the biggest priority has been to make sure that while the naming process is happening, that for students and for principals and for school staff, educators, that there really is an alignment so that the name change doesn't happen in a vacuum, or that the name is changed and then 5 years from now, there is no way to kind of really sort of draw what that through line is. And so I think in the toolkit is becoming more and more high stakes, but I think in the toolkit is where we want to try to give as many resources as possible, so that folks can think about some strategies to how do you have these conversations across generations? How do you have these conversations and an engagement process that really values and respects different perspectives, but is still aligned to a set of values and the direction of the district. So I think you'll see that in the toolkit, and we'll try to get that. And I think that that's some of the discussion that the small group is grappling with as well, in sort of like, how do you come up with a naming criteria that does contend with the fact that a lot of historical figures don't stand the test of time because of some pretty racist and colonizing practices of the past.
And Danny has said it well, but I'll just add, I know the historical and educational perspective, especially as it relates to folks who have other kinds of relationships, connections to a school building who aren't students. I think the alumni engagement is something that has been happening and is continuing to happen. But in the long term, we really are thinking about building clarity around how we look and consider artifacts that are relevant to a school community. And I think the people who are a part of it and the things that happen in it are central parts of the conversation. And so I know that folks might be in various places, right, with what might be meaningful to them, especially with the different lived experiences that folks have in a given school community. And I think you're asking good questions, and I think folks are continuing to grapple with what is most relevant to those principles that Wilson created ultimately, that ultimately is reflective of the school community's values. And so that kind of helps center those discussions with alumni and helps folks be able to connect and bring their honest perspectives. In Madison's end, they're looking at creed. And so I know racial equity is at the center of their value system that they have articulated for their school community, and has playing a role. And when we have conversations with folks who might not be in agreement at first, or having that discussion amongst what might be best. But yes, I think that our vision and staying student-centered is a part of how we think about holding space for perspectives that are even different, but being able to connect that to a common goal or a common understanding.
Thank you. And I'm unclear because I'm trying to get at what specific conversations are happening now, what kind of inclusion is happening now, and how you're trying to facilitate that conversation of sometimes opposing views.
So I think what we're doing now is we're following the current administrative directive, which requires that there be a community panel. So in addition to students that are part of the naming teams, they also have community members. Both principals of Madison and Wilson did a pretty robust sort of not only vetting, but also outreach to get diverse perspectives. And Shanice's team has been supporting the facilitation of the meetings where some of this has come out. I think that at least in practice, what we're seeing is that much like our naming and defining places committee, a lot of folks are really listening and trying to center on the experiences of youth. And so we're hearing much more challenges around the timeline around construction, as opposed to the difficulty across generations or between alumni and students. I think that our community is really bought into listening to students and sort of thinking about what that looks like.
Great, that's more what I was trying to get concretely what was happening now on the ground. Thanks.
Any other questions before we wrap this up? Oh, Michelle,
I
go
have
ahead.
a quick comment. I just want to commend staff for addressing this work. I know it can't be easy, with everything else going on in our lives and work lives, but also just I want to speak to the importance of addressing this at this time now, after we've seen a summer of protests. We've seen a pandemic happen that nobody expected. No one's trying to rewrite history. It's just that history has always been told from the side of the oppressor. So there are two sides to history, and the people that are on the other side of history haven't had their voices elevated ever in curriculum, in history books, in just our understanding of who's important, who's a leader. And so I really appreciate, I'm looking forward to hearing more about these discussions, because it is important work. And we are tied to some nostalgic view of what leadership is. I think it would behoove all of us to expand our understanding of who's important, whose voices are important to elevate, which icons we're that we're venerating. And so anyway, thank you. I just want to thank you for your work. I know it's an extra lift in a tough year.
All right, thank you.
If I could just,
go ahead, Andy.
yeah, no, I just wanted to add my voice to Director DePasas as well, and others who have said it, and thank the staff. This is an incredibly comprehensive process you've put together, sort of forward looking on how to do this. And it was what we talked about early on. We had a lot of community members demanding instant change. They wanted us as a board to take a vote that week, on changing the names. And I think, what we said at the time was the way to do this right is to listen to the community, is to build a process, to be inclusive in that. And seeing what you've come back with, in a very short period of time, we are moving quickly, I think is really impressive. So thanks to staff for that. And I also wanted to say, Wilson, that process, which is again under the current administrative directive, has narrowed it down to 5 finalist names. So I would encourage everyone here and in the community to go review those. And there's a Google form to submit your input around the Wilson process in particular. I say that as a graduate of Wilson High School and one who is looking very much forward to changing the name to something that I think is more worthy of our community and our values.
And aren't you also a current Wilson parent?
Also a current and future Wilson parent, yes.
Yeah, so you've got lots of ties to that community. Excellent. All right, Superintendent Guerrero, I'm going to turn it over to you, and then we're going to take a short break.
Great. Stephen, if you could stay on camera. Thank you, directors, for your comments, and thank you, Danny, Shanice, Ernie, the students, the site administrators, for participating in a deliberate design process. And taking advantage of this being a learning opportunity. And I think it'll help reset how we engage in these processes when these questions and interests in reflecting on the names of our buildings. So thank you for the work there. So I asked if I could go a little bit off script with our chair, because this pandemic has really disrupted some of our routines, or I should say my routine. And I realized when I saw Stephen on the screen that I dropped the ball, because normally in person, I've tried to make it a custom when we have a new team member, a new senior leader in the district, that we give them a proper introduction. So if you don't mind me taking a moment to do that now, I can't let it go. And so if I could, directors, introduce to you Dr. since we're using honorifics, especially these days, Dr. Stephen Stapleton. He joined recently as an area senior director. He's supporting 9 elementary schools and 2 K-8s in the Cleveland and Franklin cohort. He's working alongside Dr. Esther O. And prior to joining us here in Portland, where he actually grew up and has roots, he comes to us from Texas's largest school district, HISD, Houston, where he served for a long time as a well-recognized school leader. In fact, led a middle school for the largest academic growth in the state. It's a pretty big state, so that's quite an acknowledgement in low socioeconomic communities. So that was one thing about his career path that certainly was appealing to us, and the accolades that he's received for that work. He started actually originally as a science teacher. He's also worked as a specialist in instructional technology. He's worked his way up through the ranks, and that includes as a director of professional learning for educators and school leaders. He earned his BS in biology, actually, from UT Austin, Hookham. He has his master's in ed administration from Lamar, and his doctorate in ed leadership from Texas A&M University. So I wanted to make sure that he got that proper introduction. We're really happy to have him join an already dynamic team. And I think we were saying earlier what a difference talent makes when you're engaged in this challenging work. But with your permission, I'd love to give him a minute to say a word about his initial impression and time here in PPS. Stephen?
I think Superintendent Guerrero, one of the reasons you might be thrown off is that today is not Stephen's first day. And often senior leadership is coming before us on their very first day at work with PPS. So welcome, Dr. Stapleton.
Thank you. And I know it's not a habit to correct my bosses, but I am a doctoral candidate. I haven't earned that yet. I was busy working in middle schools and most recently a high school. that was focused on work. And so I'm taking the long plan. My parents rushed me through my 4 years of undergrad, so I'm taking my time now. But we will get that done soon enough. So I appreciate that. You know, being part of PPS, I wanted to come back here. You know, went to school in Vancouver for a little while across the river. My father was in the military, and you know, being at a school most recently where, you know, we were focused on environmental justice and social justice, being one of the only high schools in the nation to do that. Coming to Portland felt like a natural connection. You know, one, it did feel like I was moving back home, but, you know, Portland Public Schools is on the forefront of equity and social justice. The conversations that we're having here, public school districts across the nation are not having these same conversations at the depth and level that they're being had here. And that is something that I want to be a part of, but is a testament to the work. I've worked a long time for, or done work with a nonprofit called the Schlechte Center with Phil Schlechte. And, you know, he talks about the roles of the school board and the superintendent. He describes perfectly what a learning organization is, and describing the role of the school board as community builders and advocates for schools. And you know, I've seen that most recently, you know, just in the actions of the board, but with Director Bailey visiting classrooms with him at multiple campus and being able to see his interaction with principals and students in the classrooms. And it's something that you don't see. And, you know, having Superintendent Guerrero here, you know, Phil Schlechte describes the role of the superintendent as a moral and intellectual leader, and capacity builder. And truly, you know, this is a place that allows people to speak their truth, allows employees to feel safe to speak their truth, but also provides that level of professional development and learning that you just don't see everywhere. And so I am so thankful to be here. And while it is about 6 months onto the job, I am so happy to meet all of you. And I'm excited for all the great work that PPS is doing. And I'm looking forward to being here for a long time. Thank you. And thank you, Superintendent Guerrero.
Welcome, Stephen.
What is the name of the author that you just mentioned?
His name's Philip Schlechte. I'll send you an email too.
Great. All right, well, we are going to take a little break here. Some of us have been in meetings since 4:30 this afternoon. So we're going to do, I'm going to be generous. Let's do a 10-minute break. Give you a chance to take a walk, get the dogs back out, take a bio break, do what you need, stretch, and we will be back here at 7:40. Is Director DePass with us?
I will text her.
Okay. All right, while Rosanna's sorting that, I'm going to go ahead and ask Director Moore to go ahead and introduce this next piece of our agenda, as she is the chair of our policy committee. Director Moore.
Thank you. I am presenting the policy, the student suicide prevention policy for first reading. And I just want to say a few words about how this policy came about. So this is a policy that is required by an Oregon law known as Addie's Law, which was enacted in 2019, thanks largely to the advocacy of the family of Addie Staub. Addie was a PPS student who identified as transgender and died by suicide in 2017. This policy could have been a sterile recitation of the statutory requirements, but this draft policy instead reflects the thoughtful work of PPS staff Mila Rodriguez Adair and Amy Rowona of our Office of Student Support Services. They've worked with students, staff, the Staub family, community partners, and board members to leverage this opportunity to build a district-wide understanding of the scope of the issue of suicide among adolescents and young adults, and create a genuine wraparound system to identify and support students experiencing crises. Mila and Amy are present here. They're available if anybody has questions, but they will formally present at the second reading of this policy in January. And Mr. Staub will be invited to attend by the board chair, and he'll be given the opportunity to speak if he chooses to. This policy defines what plan the district must have, and in turn, what plan each school must have to respond to suicidality among students. And at this point, Mila or Amy, if there's anything significant that I've missed in describing this policy, please offer additional info if you think it's necessary. Otherwise, I'm available for questions, and Amy and Mila are all.
I just want to, sorry, you want to go ahead, Julia?
I was just going to say, since Amy and Mila are here, I think I don't want to pass up the opportunity to thank them for all the work they did, that sort of passion and heart that they brought to the work, because policymaking sometimes can be dry and abstract and impersonal, and that is not the case at all for this policy that we're first read tonight. So thank you to you and your teams, and really pulling in voices from the community, I say, and approaching it with heart versus just we need to do this to comply with the law.
Thank you, Julia. I echo that exactly. And just, we don't often get a lot of insight into the work of our mental health support team. And this is an example of such incredible work and incredible engagement. I was especially impressed with the student engagement that went into it. So thank you very much. It's really meaningful to me that we're having this first reading tonight, because we have a work session later on health, as you know, and there's some just really sobering and just profoundly troubling information in there about how many of our students have suicidal thoughts or have attempted suicide. So this is an issue that affects a much bigger part of our student population than I think most of us realized before. And so it's so important to bring it out of the closet and to be proactive about making sure that students and families know what supports there are available to them. And I do hope that Addie's family joins us, Rita, for the final passing, because, you know, there's no greater gift that they can bring to our community in their child's honor than really making sure that others don't suffer the same fate. So this is really, really important work.
The proposed policy will be posted on the board website, and the public comment period is 21 days. So contact information for public comment will be also posted with the policy. And the plan for the second reading will be at our meeting on January 12th of 2021. And I came back to the policy committee meeting after a couple months off, and it was with great joy to hear the incredible work that Amy and Mila have done, along with the Staub family. And just as Director Moore said, taking this from sort of, or was that maybe Director Brim-Edwards, taking this from just a cold policy into something that's a living document that is deeply for our students. Director Bailey, did you have a comment?
I'd also like to thank staff for their work and for their outreach. This policy will be a big step forward for us, and especially the implementation of the policy, which we've also talked about well, and really engaging our students and staff in ways that support them, and I'm sure will help prevent suicides going forward.
All right. Thank you so much. And thank you to Amy and Mila for being here tonight. I know that that's a lot to ask of staff to give up your evening to be at one of our lengthy board meetings, but thank you so much for being here, both so we could thank you for the incredible work you have done and continue to do, but also just in case we had any questions. Thank you. And if you haven't taken a moment to really read into the depths of this, just know that Amy and Mila both have done a huge amount of work in really creating an excellent, excellent policy. We move on now to the report on evidence of implementation of the Secretary of State's audit recommendations. And Director Brim-Edwards, as chair of the audit committee, would you like to introduce this next item?
Great, thank you. I was just looking through my emails. For the first time, we received a notice that Secretary of State was going to come back for an audit review, and it was March 18th. So you can imagine why it is that now here it is on December 15th that we're having the conversation instead. So just since this audit spans two versions of the board, in January of 2019, the Secretary of State's audit division had an audit of both the Oregon Department of Education and Portland Public Schools titled ODE and PPS Must Do More to Monitor Spending and Address Systemic Obstacles to Student Performance, particularly at struggling schools. And at the time, PPS provided a lengthy response. And as is the practice of the Secretary of State's audit division, they come back to check whether the implementation has occurred. So there are two things so they've come back and said they're ready to review the implementation. So on Friday, there will be a document submitted to the Secretary of State, which really will be sort of our initial response. The Secretary of State's office, we should expect that they'll perhaps ask to interview people, ask for additional evidence, ask for documentation, meet with staff to better understand places where they have questions or clarifications. So what we're doing is providing our best what we view as like the evidence that we've followed through on the findings and the recommendations and what we said we were going to do when we responded to the audit initially. So there's sort of two parts. One part we're not going to have a discussion about unless, of course, staff board members can ask, of course, whatever they want. But there's a portion of it that is the management response. And so that is 3 through 3 through 25, 1 through 3, and then some other random numbers are the ODEs, and then you have district staff responding to the bulk of the audit. And they have brought evidence and sort of the quarterly reporting on how they're responding to the audits and the findings and their implementation on a somewhat regular basis to the audit committee. So that's a piece. And then the other piece is there was recommendation number 26, which was to the PPS Board of Education as a whole. And they had a number of recommendations. They, instead of doing it in a sequence of numbers, it was 26A through F, I believe. And so most of them paired up with items that the district staff and management has responded to. And then it was that the board should ensure that staff has done these things. So what we have before us tonight is a document that provides evidence of implementation that the board has an opportunity to review of the district staff's implementation of the recommendations from the audit. And I would say, if I was going to describe sort of our two tasks as a group, it's one, to have a consensus on the status. And for each of these, we have an opportunity to either indicate that the district has implemented, they've partially implemented, or not implemented. So that's one thing, to have a consensus of the board or a majority of the board say, this is, we believe this is the status of the implementation. And then second, it is to review the evidence of the recommendations, and if there's anything that you feel is missing or that should be added, or there's evidence that's been provided that the district has implemented a recommendation, that can be added. And I said, this is not the endpoint. So there will be an endpoint. I know that we're all looking forward to that, but that this is a document that then the Secretary of State can review the evidence, the documentation behind it, not just of what we were attesting to, but also management's response as well. And I will say, when I look through here, the amount of work that's happened in sort of like the COVID, even including in the COVID grace period, that there's been a tremendous amount of work around issues the Secretary of State's office and the auditors flagged as things that their findings in the report. So that is what we have before us. And I think there was a question about whether this was something that the audit committee would have done. In conversations with the state auditors, the audit committee, because it has community members, and because this is the board's this is the board accountability piece, that it really is the board's work. And again, this originally would have come to us in March, but they said because of the request for the response, but because of COVID, they just came back, I think, 2 weeks ago to ask that we submit our response, which is both the management piece and then the Board of Education piece. So unless board members have a different way in which they want to proceed, what I thought we could do is, if people are prepared to let us know where they think, if they've reviewed the evidence or if they have a point of view. I know we've had some initial discussions on sort of what everybody might have a different standard on how they're going to judge whether or not PPS has, for example, the PPS board should ensure that district administrators prioritize key steps to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of district operations. So that could be it could be subjective. And so there's no wrong answer for any board member of what you feel whether the district has done something. We have tried to provide some evidence that is what the auditors would look for in terms of, here's evidence of implementation. Before we move on, is any questions from anybody on the board?
I think the one place that I think we need to talk about structurally, and this is not the time to have the fleshed out conversation, is the idea that the audit committee, like several of the other committees, is sort of poised to do some of the deeper dives, and that it might be helpful to think about the audit committee coming back with recommendations on some of this, and that yes, the full board make the ultimate decisions, but some of this deciding if it's implemented or partially implemented, it would be helpful, I think, to have a recommendation. So I think that's one of the things that I think that we just need to talk through how we as a board want to think about that. But for this moment in time, we're at this moment. And so I think that's a further conversation for another day.
Yeah,
I agree with that, Chair Lowry. And one other just kind of broader umbrella comment about this process is that I think we need to make clear sort of the chronology in which this work occurred and when it was undertaken, because the way this is presented in response to the format of the Secretary of State's audit appears that these actions that are cited as evidence were undertaken in response to the Secretary of State's audit, when in fact the vast majority of them were already underway. Some of them had largely taken root by the time the Secretary of State's office did this audit, and they used some documents, source documents that went back 2 years in time from when they came, which predated the superintendent's arrival and virtually our entire leadership team's arrival. So I think that's really important because whether we like it or not, this is an opportunity for us to tell a story about the transformation that's been underway in this district. And I think we should use that opportunity.
It's an excellent point, Director Constam. And I think if you look at the initial response, we did a lot of that. We supplied way more information of the work that was underway. And some of it was acknowledged and some of it wasn't. And that's the auditor's choice. We did, and I know staff spent, this was, I think, Rita, myself, Claire, Guadalupe's sort of Christmas or holiday break in December of 2018. And so it's an excellent point, and we could add a cover point, a cover letter. I think what you have here is from an auditor standpoint, as we checked in on what would be considered evidence that there had been implementation, that this was the format that it was suggested, and not that there hadn't been work beforehand.
So my understanding tonight, Director Brim-Edwards, is that we as a board need to decide on A through F of response 26, whether we as a board would say it's implemented, partially implemented, or not implemented, correct? That is our work before us in the next 25 minutes or so, is to go through each one, A through F, and decide implemented, not implemented, or partially implemented, correct?
Yes, and if there's data that you think is either missing or irrelevant, you could flag that. Director Scott, looked like you had a question.
Yeah, thanks. I want to make I won't belabor this point, but I think it's important to put it on the record. So I am troubled by this process overall, and I understand where we are and the need to provide a response. I think what troubles me the most is that I don't think what the Secretary of State did in this last section regarding the board and asking us to weigh in independently follows best audit practices. In fact, I think it's actually very poor practice. I have been subject of many, many government audits on the management side. not a single one of those audits has the auditor ever included something that asks the elected officials to weigh in separately from management in terms of whether things have been implemented. I obviously wasn't on the board when this audit findings, came through. I wish at the time, and frankly, to be really frank, I wish now that we would actually be going back to the Secretary of State to tell them that we will not be responding to this in the way they've asked us to, because I don't think it follows best audit practices. I think what this ends up doing is politicizes the findings. Our job as a board is to hold the superintendent responsible for, in fact, following through on all kinds of management initiatives, including following up on audits. That's part of our normal work. I think asking us to independently verify the work that's been done by the board, it asks us to do something that we're neither equipped nor staffed nor well positioned to do, and sets up a really bad precedent where, because we are elected officials, we might want to politicize the findings and be somehow cautious about sort of following through. So I'm saying that because for me in this process, for each one of these, what I'm going to be asking the superintendent to do is tell me whether he believes it is implemented, partially implemented, or not implemented. And that is going to be my vote for what we're moving forward with. Because I think what, again, is important is we need to move forward on a lot of these things. And I don't disagree with some of the findings. But again, I think the structure and the process the Secretary of State put forward was intentionally meant to politicize in a way that I think is harmful to the district.
So Director Scott, I think it's a question of if it is the will of the board we could choose not to respond to this. We could choose to say exactly what you've said, that we do not feel like this is best practices and we will not respond. And that's something that if we want to do that, we need to have that conversation now.
Or Chair Lowry, a middle ground might be, we could paraphrase what Director Scott just said, why we don't believe it's best practice, and then still, of course, include the responses from management with their assessment of implementation, and say that as a board, if we so vote, that we endorse their assessment of the state of things.
And given where we are today, I am comfortable with that middle ground. I'm comfortable with the board sending back a response, again, given the history and, the board changes over time. What I would be uncomfortable with is if we deviate in any way from management's response, because I think that's indicative of a different issue that might be going on in the district, which I don't think we have, but I don't want to make sure we don't go down that road.
All right, I see that Director Bailey and Director DePass are unmuted, and neither one has had a chance to speak yet. So Michelle, did you?
Yeah, thank you. I agree with what you just said, Director Scott, and also Constam, that we can go for middle ground. It just sets us up, and especially the audit committee, we're kind of in charge of upholding processes that are transparent, and this just does not feel like the right way to proceed.
So the one thing I would,
Julia, I'm going to let Director Bailey speak. He hasn't had a chance to speak yet, and then we'll come back to you. Scott?
Yeah, I will agree with Director DePass and supporting Director Scott and Director Constam's comments. We've already spent an inordinate amount of time on this process. It's time to move on.
Director Brim-Edwards?
Yeah, so we already responded to this audit. And to the findings quite extensively. So I think to go back and say now, we did say at the time, we actually had a press conference before they released it that said it was a political audit, and that there were motivations in how it got released. But we did respond and we agreed with the recommendations. I think it would be unusual for us now to go back and say, even though we said we were going to implement and take action on the recommendations, for us not to do that now. We could do, the board as a whole could decide that. I wouldn't recommend it.
That's why I would recommend the middle ground, where we still provide the evidence of implementation, but we just attach it as the management letter with the board's endorsement.
So I think the question tonight then is, what do we do with this response 26. Do we go ahead and say implemented, not implemented, partially implemented, or do we just turn in what we already have? I think that's the decision we as a board need to make in this moment.
I'm sorry, turn in what we already have.
So you've already submitted to us the 26 with all of the evidence, Julia. The only thing that's not in 26 are those final board decisions.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be also, I think we should submit the evidence. You know, for the past year, when I've raised this issue with leadership, nobody has ever said we're not going to respond. So it would be it'd be unfortunate to have gathered the evidence and not to submit it.
No, that's not what I was saying.
Suggesting that.
Yeah, I think what I was saying is so earlier tonight, the board was emailed out the response to number 26. The piece that we have left to do at the meeting tonight is as a board to decide if we are going to say that each A through F is implemented, partially implemented, or not implemented. Do we want to, what I'm asking the board is, do we want to do that? Or do we want to just send the evidence in? Or do we want to do like Andrew suggested when he first spoke and follow, I guess it's up to each board member to decide if they want to follow the lead of what Superintendent Guerrero recommends on each one. That's up to each board member to discern. But I think there's a bigger question here about process. And I know Director Brim-Edwards, you've been frustrated about this process. And I think I have been too, on the lack of clarity of how the board is responding, what we're supposed to do, and the relationship between the audit committee, and the full board. So I think there's more work for us all to do in sort of a structural process level as we continue with next steps with this Secretary of State audit. But right now in this moment, we as a board need to make a decision about how we're going to proceed. So I think we should go ahead and do the implemented, not implemented, partially implemented, and go ahead and come to a consensus on A through F tonight. That's my 2 cents. What do other people think?
I would be interested in hearing if there's collective board support for just asking the superintendent to make a determination about the status of implementation, and then whether collectively there's support for endorsing the superintendent's assessment.
That would be my preference for the way forward.
Can I make
I don't support that.
Okay, let's hear from Rita.
So I'm a little uncomfortable putting the superintendent on the spot right now, asking him to, decree whether each of these items is implemented or what's status. If I understand correctly, I believe each of these, A through F corresponds to the recommendations that are above this, that have been where staff has responded with evidence about their progress in working on the findings. I agree with Andrew that our assessment of the degree of implementation should not diverge from what the management response is saying. But I doubt very much that Superintendent Guerrero has committed that information to memory. So I would suggest that offline, following this meeting, we sync up the sections in recommendation 26 to the other recommendation areas in the rest of the response, and just adopt the same status assessment.
Director Brim-Edwards, I know you were trying to speak there before Director Moore started.
I don't know if I did. So I think we can't do, the board can't do the reason why I've been asking for almost 2 years, or a year and a half, to have a board discussion is the board can't do its work offline. So, and if we need to submit something on Friday, we should just make a decision. So if somebody wants to make a motion of what you want, what if somebody wants to do that, I would move that we submit the evidence. I think we should divide it into two parts. I think there's two parts. The evidence that we've already gathered and staff participated in that process. And then second, how we want to do. You could make a motion that it will mirror the staff recommendation. Somebody can make that motion. You can make a motion that we're gonna come to a collective decision tonight. That would be the other one. Or the third would be, we're not gonna have a point of view on that. But I think I would recommend that we divide it into those two parts.
I think that's great. I'm happy to make a motion, both that we submit the evidence, it's been gathered, and I see no reason not to submit that to the Secretary of State's office, and that we as a board make our response to the Secretary of State's audit consistent with management's response on these items. And I'm assuming that they sync up exactly. I'm trying to go back to when I was on the audit committee when we talked about this, but that we would mirror management's response on this.
I second that motion.
So can we divide the two, please? Because they're two different topics. Is that?
So what are I think when we talk about evidence, are we talking about 3 through 25, or are we talking about the evidence that was part of the 26 that
we don't need to do anything with management. They're going to submit their own.
So what you're talking about is the evidence that accompanied the 26 memo that we received late this afternoon. And I just, having been on board leadership for the last 6 months, I would say that we have definitely tried to make a way forward for this, Julia. And we brought it up at agenda setting and have tried to find a path to have this. So I want to just say on the record that this is not something that board leadership has been ignoring, that this has been something we've been working towards. Sorry, Andrew, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say, it seems like this is all part of one response. So I guess I'm comfortable with the motion as it is, that we would submit the evidence and it would mirror management's response.
Yeah, I don't understand why they need to be separated. If you can help us understand that, Dr. Broom-Edwards.
Well, I'd like to, because as a courtesy, I'd like to vote for the evidence that I've spent some time, but I don't support having the board not take a position on what we think, whether or not it's been implemented or not.
Well, this is where a recommendation from the audit committee would have been helpful. And it is deeply disappointing to me that to discover that the audit committee has not been discussing this recommendation on a regular basis. I know the audit committee has been assiduously tracking the implementation of the responses to all of the other recommendations. So it came as a surprise to me that the audit committee was not going to be presenting a recommendation to the full board, because that is the way this board has structured all of its work. We have multiple committees that do work that is a responsibility of the full board, with the understanding that the individual committees get deep into weeds and then report to the full board for consideration with recommendations.
The audit committee is the only committee that has 2 community members on it, and we had a discussion, and the conversation was that it needed to be addressed by a conversation by the full board, which never happened despite being asked.
Okay.
And
I think we've talked about this later. All right, we have a motion before us. Andrew made a motion and I seconded it. Liz, are we legal here with this motion that Andrew made and my seconding of it, or where are we in process?
Fine. That's fine.
And so Director Broom-Edwards in our discussion of this motion has asked that we separate it. So is that an amendment that you're making to the motion, Director Broom-Edwards?
As a courtesy, I would ask for that. And if people don't want to extend the courtesy, that's the rest of the board's decision.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand. So separate it and then what?
So Julie, what my understanding,
I would like to, since I spent a considerable amount of time, even though it wasn't the audit committee's responsibility, building out the evidence, I'd like to be able to support the submission of the evidence, but I don't support we're going to just adopt whatever staff's position is. But if the board doesn't want to do, that's fine. I ask as a professional courtesy.
Director Bream Edwards, could you talk a little bit more about why you're uncomfortable making sure that the board and the superintendent are in sync on these recommendations?
Because we were asked by the auditor they gave us a recommendation. We responded earlier this spring. Not that we didn't think this was our responsibility, but said we would implement our portion of it. So to me, it seems contrary to what we did earlier to now adopt a position that this isn't our responsibility, it's management's responsibility. And I do see a difference between management and the board. And like, as I said at the very beginning, I knew there was just based on our earlier conversation, Director Scott, that there was a diversity of opinion. I think you had said early on, like, I don't even really need to go through this process. I'm going to take the position if they say that, I'm good with that. So, I want to acknowledge that people can have a range of positions. I felt like we spent a fair amount of time responding to what they said to us before, and we didn't say, when you come back, we're not going to have a point of view on whether we think something's been implemented.
I mean, what you're highlighting is actually one of the reasons why I think this is a bad practice from the Secretary of State, is because elected officials do change. And the board today is different than the board at the audit. The board, the next time we respond to this or the next time there's a follow-up, it could be different as well. So I think that is problematic in a way that management doesn't. The other thing, just to be on the record, so anyone watching who cares about it understands. I mean, one of my concerns, just looking at the very first one, I mean, this is asking the board to independently verify whether the district has built an effective Common Core curriculum based on state standards and ensuring adequate school support and accountability for performance. This is solid operational work in the district. And one of the things that we have learned very clearly, and the Secretary of State, I wish would have seen this as well, is that board role is at a policy level, and it's at an oversight level, and it's not at an operational level. And my concern, just to reiterate, is that this audit forces us, or attempts to force us, to get involved at an operational level where I don't believe it is the board's role, and I don't believe it's appropriate. And so I, again, just have real concerns about that. So, you framed it as a courtesy in terms of separating it, and I don't mean this to seem like a discourtesy at all. I just view it as this is one response. So my audit is really just intended to say this is what the response is, and I do think it's a middle ground. I appreciate the evidence you've gathered, and I hope it is persuasive to the Secretary of State that management is in fact implementing, and I hope the Secretary of State, to the extent they don't feel that it is persuasive, or that any of the audit response is persuasive, that in their follow-up response, they'll provide that. And then as the board, we can take that into account in terms of our discussions with the superintendent moving forward, if there's a difference of opinion there. So I do think there's a process here for, because accountability is very important. It's why we're here. And I think there's a process for that to work forward. I've said what I wanted to say, so I'll stop.
Superintendent Guerrero, do you want to wade into anything here, or would you like to maintain your cone of silence in this moment?
I'm trying to be a good employee, Chair, so we're subjected to this audit. I think I've shared my personal views on the title and everything behind it, but we were asked to speak to a number of sections, and in the auditor's minds, that's the work we needed to do. So we've done our best to list all the evidence and activity for each section. My hope is that as the board reflects on our progress, that hopefully we have alignment in recognizing that there's been work done. And admittedly, we've already, committed to whether we think we've implemented fully or we're part of the way there. And so we've already done that self-reflection. I'm thinking of sort of our own process for a superintendent evaluation. It's like, in some ways you have 25 plus sections of staff's reflection of work. And I completely can empathize with Director Scott's sort of viewpoint on this. And at the same time, I know that it's been a challenge, and I appreciate Director Brim-Edwards, attempting to shepherd through in good faith that, we're completing this task. I'd love to turn the homework in and move on, frankly. So I'm a little loath to spend too much more energy on this because it's already occupied a lot of bandwidth for board and staff.
I know staff did a ton of work in helping prepare this 26 response memo as well. So we know that staff has been doing a lot for this. Director Constam, did you have a comment?
I do. I do think it's really important to submit this evidence. And as Director Scott said, it's important for the district to be responsive if the Secretary of State comes back and says that any of it is insufficient. But the part that's compelling to me is that when you look through these, many, probably most of the things under Section 26, which are listed as board responsibilities, are really indistinguishable from the things listed in the other parts of the audit that are squarely management responsibility. And so, yeah, I'm in favor of submitting all the evidence and evidence of implementation and as one united document.
Director Brim-Edwards, as chair of the audit committee and having done all the work you've done with those sections 3 through 25 or whatever it is, do you have a recommendation on the A through F? I mean, I looked through them and my quick and dirty is that everything's implemented except for maybe the strategic plan, which is partially implemented. Did you have sort of an opinion or thought about that?
Actually, I don't want to go down that path if we're not going to. I mean, there's no sense going down that path of what my point of view is if we're not going. If the will of the board is not to have the board weigh in.
Okay, so I guess Director Bailey, are you waiting to say something?
No.
Okay, so I guess right now we need to decide. We have a motion before us that Andrew made that I seconded. Director Brim-Edwards has asked us to amend the motion to separate the evidence from the implementation piece. So is there any further board discussion on this motion and amendment?
Well, procedurally, we should vote on the amendment, and that should be our topic of discussion right now, and then move to the main motion.
So the amendment, Director Brim-Edwards is asking that we amend the motion. There's not been a formal amendment made or second on that amendment.
I move that we first remove the evidence.
Suggest we restate the motion that is currently on the floor.
Sure. So, so the motion is that we submit, as part of the Secretary of State's audit response, the evidence that's been gathered, and that the board's response in terms of whether it's implemented, fully implemented, partially implemented, mirror management's response.
Okay, so I guess.
Is there a second to that restated motion, just to be clear that we're all talking about the same?
Well, that was just the same motion as before that I think Chair Lowry seconded.
I would like to add a caveat that I'd like to see the full management response before it goes off with our endorsement.
I think the full management response was in the board books that we received ahead of this meeting.
Well, I think this means it would include the assessment of implementation for the Section 26 stuff as well.
That's not staff's responsibility, though.
Yeah, I don't think this would be included in the staff response. I think we would still have, I think, so my understanding is to make this happen, then one of us from the board would have to then look at the staff response and make sure that our responses mirrored theirs. So it's going to take a board member's work after this meeting to get this submitted by Friday if we vote this way. So that'll be the next question is if we vote to do this, then that means someone going through what the staff has responded and ensuring that our response mirrors that.
So while I don't agree with the process, I'm happy to do that. It shouldn't take very much time. I mean, it's a mechanical process.
All right.
And I actually don't think we should spend a lot more time. So if people don't want to split them.
I'm okay to split it, Julia. I'm fine. I second that motion to split. Michelle, did you have a comment?
Nope.
All right, so I second the motion to split. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Okay, all in favor of the Brim Edwards amendment, please indicate your support by saying yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
All those opposed, please indicate by saying no.
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 Okay, all abstaining. So I think we had 3 yes and 4 no. Is that correct? I was at, can we do thumbs up if you were a yes and some sideways if you were a no, because it's hard to count on the internets. Okay, so I think it was, okay. So the amendment fails. So we move on to the main motion. Andrew, could you read it again, just for clarification's sake?
Yeah, Nathaniel has a quick question.
Sorry, Nathaniel, you're not on my screen.
Yeah, do I vote on that?
I think so.
Liz says she doesn't think so. Thank you for asking that clarifying question. Sorry for skipping over you. Sometimes this stuff gets a little procedurally, which is why we have Liz. All right, Andrew, can you read that emotion again?
When you say read, I think you mean restate. So the motion is that management's, the board's response is to submit the evidence that has been gathered, and that our response in terms of implementation would mirror management's response on those same issues.
All right, this motion is before us.
I would use the word endorse. It sounds less knee-jerk to me, and like it actually is an acceptance of the work that has been done rather than a philosophical orientation to just accept it.
All right, so
I'll accept that as a friendly amendment.
I think we still have to do all of our motion-y stuff on it. That's what I've been told before. Friendly amendment, Liz, thumbs up. Do we need to do the
Thumbs
full-
up, friendly amendments, fine.
Oh, friendly amendment, fine. Okay.
Unless there's, with no objection, a friendly amendment is fine. They endorse these.
Okay. So that amendment, that motion is before us. All in favor, or is there any further discussion on that motion? All right, all in favor, please indicate so by saying yes. Oh, sorry, Director Brim Edwards.
I just want to clarify that my vote in no way is a reflection of the evidence, since I was involved in the gathering it. It's just, I have a different perspective on
the process,
what we agreed to do.
All right, all in favor of the motion, please indicate so by saying yes.
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 All opposed, please indicate so by saying no. All those who abstain. Director Brim Edwards, did you vote?
I did. And I'd like to explain I voted yes because I believe I believe in the evidence, and I think I've been on the record as I don't support the other piece. But if I have to make one vote, I'm going to vote for that. But I strongly disagree with the other part of it.
Sorry, I just was super confused for a minute. It's getting late. I'm a little punchy. Okay, so the motion on the Secretary of State audit passes 7-0. And Director Brim Edwards is going to look at the management thing and endorse those. I think it would be helpful to have another board member support you in that work. Director Bailey, are you volunteering for that? You're just raising your hand. You're muted, sir.
Yeah. This is going to be like a 5-minute task.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a task to just go to the other one.
Okay. So
I think I'm capable of doing it, and I'm happy to have somebody look at my work, check my work afterwards.
Yeah, that's not why. Yeah, that's not why I raised my hand.
I didn't realize it would only take 5 minutes. So thank you, Director Brim Edwards, for stepping up to that. Director Moore, were you going to say something?
I was. So based on what Andrew was saying in the beginning about how it is unusual to have this kind of thing included in an audit, do we want to write I don't know, sort of preamble paragraph attached to this, or just be done with it?
I vote be done.
Yeah, I would go back to the superintendent's comments. I think where we are, it may be better to just be done.
Right. I mean, they're still going to come back and ask us for, I mean, we're not quite done, but I think we're done with this piece.
All right. Well, thank you for that work, Director Brim-Edwards. Really appreciate it. And I know this has been a long road. We move now to to Resolution 6220, Portland Public Schools Legislative Agenda. And Superintendent Guerrero, would you like to introduce this next item?
Yes, we actually have Miss Courtney Westling. I think we're going to move her on screen here. And she's going to share with us a bit more about an overview of your evolving legislative agenda. So Courtney, there she is.
Does anyone ever think of Star Trek, like, you know, and being beamed in and beamed out of our meeting?
She's now teleported.
Am I up? Okay. Good evening, board directors. For the record, Courtney Westling, Director of Government Relations. I am, first of all, Director Scott, do you want to introduce this?
Sure, I'll be quick and then I'll turn it over to you for the real substance. Okay. So yeah, tonight what you have before you is the legislative agenda for Portland Public Schools. And this has been, the Intergovernmental Committee has reviewed this a couple of different times. And you know, staff sort of put this together, and we have made some additions and amendments to it over time. The overall legislative agenda is aligned with the 5 educational system shifts of Portland Public Schools, and then broken into different categories of funding, racial equity in education, creating a welcoming and safe learning environment, school reopening and comprehensive distance learning, and operational improvements. I guess I would just say, Courtney, you may want to add something. I did want to flag, I had it up here a minute ago and then I've lost it. But one of the changes, there it is. I just wanted to note, in case Nathaniel hadn't seen, our student representative did ask for something related to climate change. And so we do have a highlighted bullet in there. PPS will support and advocate for policy proposals that address the climate crisis and promote climate justice, especially when directly relevant to school districts. And I just wanted to thank him. I think this is one of the reasons we have student advisors who help with these committees, is to point out some really obvious things that I think we're all very much in support of, and I think that made it stronger. So thanks for that addition. Courtney, anything you want to tell the board?
And I'll, on that same note, I asked Nathaniel if he wanted to suggest language, and that's his language verbatim, because I thought it was great. So thanks, Nathaniel, for not only offering language, but offering great language. Yeah, so I'll just start at the top, go through this pretty quickly. As Director Scott mentioned, I'm trying to align our agenda more closely with the system shifts that we've outlined for the strategic plan for this school year. You know, it's important that we are constantly pointing our work back to the district's vision and our strategic plan and priorities. So we haven't done that very well in the past, or really at all. We didn't have a vision before. So this is a great, I think, opportunity to weave that into our work, legislative work. So the first, and I also want to highlight that second paragraph, which just basically says, this is not a exhaustive list. There are going to be things that come up that are not mentioned on this list that we will still want to advocate for. This is meant to kind of put all the kind of key highlight, some of the key items that we consistently advocate for year after year, things that matter to the very base level and bottom line of our organization. And then there are things that come up, you know, that are new, and they're not going to be included on this agenda because we don't know about them yet. So I just want to make that point, because it's not exhaustive. There are going to be things we care about that aren't listed, but we just need to make sure that we have a good, solid, robust list of items to go down to Salem and, well, go down to Zooming and talk about with our legislators. So to the funding piece, obviously we want to be supportive of the state school fund. The governor's budget had it at 9.1, the governor's recommended budget. That's just the starting place. We are advocating in line with all of our colleagues at OSBA, COSA, OASBO, and other districts, the 9.5 number. I think at the legislative committee a couple of weeks ago, I had it at 9.7. I did a little more work, talked to Claire, and we're gonna shoot for 9.5. It's the right number. And of course, Rita added a piece underneath that about the CSL, the issue being the 50-50 split. We have costs, we have inflation in the second year of a biennium. When we get 51% the first year and 49 the second, we end up having to make cuts. So that is why we keep talking about, the 50-50. That's why we need the 49-51, which is not what the Legislative Fiscal Office bills the number to. So this may not be a I want to make this clear. This may not be a legislative item, Rita and board members. It may be a discussion with the Legislative Fiscal Office and the governor's office, but I still think it's important to include it because it matters. And we're not the only ones that care about that, that detail. And then, of course, we are really happy and grateful for the Student Success Act, and we want to continue seeing the investments from that, monumental landmark legislation. And so that's included here. Measure 98 is fully funded in the governor's budget. There's a lot of support for that, so we'll continue to support that. The expenses related to COVID, of course, are ongoing, and so we want to make sure that we're specifically calling that out as we head into a special session next week, and then, of course, in January when the full session starts. And then continuing to support the facilities grants for seismic and modernization. Those are perennial favorites of the legislature, so I expect that that won't be too much work, but we need to continue to talk about that. Racial equity in education, of course, this goes straight to the heart of what we do here at PPS, and so I want to make sure that we specifically called out the items that will fill in, that will point straight to our racial equity agenda as a district. We also had a discussion with the Reimagine Oregon folks last meeting with the Intergovernmental Committee, and they laid out some of the work that they're doing on the education side of the policy house. And I thought that was a really instructive and informative meeting. And it really goes to show you that a lot of what we're doing, or a lot of what they're talking about, we're already doing, but it's a great synergy, I think, to be supportive of their work and to continue listening and learning from them and helping to advocate for their policy agenda. So that's listed specifically here. We talk a lot about the grow your own and the diversity in educators and school staff, and making sure that we're investing in ways to really make sure that our workforce reflects the students in our district. So that's an ongoing discussion. That's not a one and done. We had conversations last long session about this. We're going to continue having these conversations because we're not doing it well enough, and we need to keep working on it. And then a couple items at the bottom, I just want to really call out. The governor's budget is a little thin on some of our small low incidence programs, like the long-term care and treatment program, regional programs. And so we want to mention those and continue working with COSA, who's also listed this as a priority for them. So I just want to specifically call those out because they're smaller programs with low, smaller dollar amounts associated with them, but they're those are big dollars for those students and those programs. Back down to warm, welcoming, safe learning environments. We added that piece at the bottom about climate justice and addressing the climate crisis. This is not going to be I don't think, big climate session coming up, but this is an important issue. We know that. We know our students care about it. We all care about it. And so I don't want to minimize that at all. I just want to make clear that I think this session is going to be really interesting to see how much focus is obviously on the pandemic and wildfire recovery and relief and the ongoing housing issues that are, always on the table. So we'll see what happens here, but I don't expect it to be the same as last time. But I'm really glad, Nathaniel, that you brought this up and reminded us how important it is. So thank you. And then there's also a piece about I-5 on here. Director Brim Edwards and I have been in meetings a lot about this issue, and we'll continue to work with you all and keep you informed on what's going on there with the project, and then how that project interfaces with legislative. Let's see, school reopening. Okay, so the big one, the big bullet here is one that Director Scott added last meeting. PBS supports and will advocate for legislative measures that help get students back into the classroom as soon as it is safe to do so. I would say that is inclusive of advocating for vaccines for our educators and our frontline school staff. I know that's been a popular topic lately for obvious reasons. And so those conversations are happening, and I think they're going to that drum. If we want to safely get back to school, we need adults in buildings vaccinated. So I just wanted to mention that is, I think, fits really well in that bullet point, and I don't necessarily think we need a specific additional item, but that's up to you all to decide. And then the liability protections, that's coming up in the special session next week on Monday. I mentioned that in an email to you today. The governor called a special session for the 21st to take up some housing related issues, bar and restaurant support, liability, and some emergency board funding. It'll be interesting. There's still a lot of controversy around some of those items. So we shall see, but seems like there's also some bipartisan support. So, you know, your guess is as good as mine as to what happens on Monday, but I will continue to keep you updated.
Hey, Courtney, just really quickly on that, I don't want to go down too far down this road, but is the e-board funding, is the governor allocating some CARES Act dollars as part of that?
So I'm not sure, and I don't know if John or Cassie knows exactly what the source of funding is. I know that they're talking about $800 million that the governor is going to get the legislator to approve and move around. So there's $600 million for the housing issue, the housing items, the moratorium extension, some landlord relief, and then there's $200 million that's going. John, do you want to step in and
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure, you bet.
John
Just
Hughes,
so
by the
knows-
way, is on contract with us, helps us in Salem.
Hi, Ian, Cassie. Hi, nice. Good evening. So there's $600 million that they're going to allocate to the e-board to spend. 100 of which is wildfire relief, 400 is COVID relief, and 100 is for other emergency issues that come up. And I think the idea is that they give the allocation and then make those expenditures in the January emergency board, which they are planning on, at least that's what the speaker's office was saying today. And then on top of that is 200 million, and Cassie, you have to correct me if I'm wrong, $200 million additionally for housing dollars. I don't think that she exactly identified where the dollars are coming from. I think it's a mix of the remaining CARES Act dollars that need to be spent by December 31st and reserve dollars, but Cassie, correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Yeah, I think it's probably unlikely these are CARES Act dollars just because of that deadline at the end of the year. And my guess is it's more ending fund balance from this current biennium.
And the reason why I bring it up is I was a little surprised in media reports that school reopening or school expenses related to COVID didn't seem on the list. And I know one-day sessions are very, very short and generally predetermined. But I do wonder if it's worth at least planning the idea that, you know, allowing some of that e-board funding to be used for school reopening or COVID expenses might be.
On cocktails to go.
Yeah.
And honestly, thank you for saying that, because that actually was exactly what struck me, is that we're focused on cocktails to go and not reopening schools.
I think there's going to be some more information coming out in the next few days, Director Scott. Last week, I did hear that there was going to be some funds for school reopening. I don't know the number, and I don't know if something changed, and it was a good source. So I don't know if it was, if anything changed over the weekend, or if they just haven't figured it out yet. This is moving a mile a minute. You know, they're just landing on whether they were going to have a special session and whether or not, in what's going to be included. So, you know, the three of us will get together and figure out, you know, make the calls to the right people to figure out if that is actually the case, or if that was talk and got, you know, got moved over for in lieu of something else.
To that point, Courtney, the speaker's office, whom we called this morning, kind of outlined, and I don't think this is confidential, but you know, we're all just on this meeting, right? It's just us. Is that the governor's office had outlined kind of a high level thought about where those dollars should be spent.
and agencies were submitting into the governor's office their request to continue on some of the COVID relief. But there were so many that they didn't have time to vet it before, the legislature didn't have time to vet it before the special session on Monday. So they're going to push those decisions to that January e-board. And that's where I think you'll see some of the school reopening dollars and other COVID related issues be spent.
All right, thank you. Was there anything else, Courtney?
Not unless there are questions.
All right, are there any other questions before we move to voting on this legislative agenda? Thank you for the exhaustive work you have all done. Really appreciate it.
Hey, Courtney, I have one question. So one thing that's not specifically called out on here is the transformative curriculum and pedagogy, even though we do know that there's several bills specifically coming up pertaining to curriculum, sort of as follow-ons to the Native Success, Student Success Bill and the African American Student Success Bill. We also have one coming up for civics education. So do we want to call that system shift out more specifically, since we know that there is going to be activity in that area?
If you would like to do that, we certainly can. Are you referring to Dembro's conversation, or maybe you weren't there at the meeting? He talked about now it's escaping me, his bill, but
on anti-racist curriculum?
Yes, sorry, anti-racist education, and how it's going to be a few years, obviously, until we can implement it, but that he has a bill to, push that in.
Yeah, and there's a few other things. I do think we should just call out that system shift specifically, because I think we're going to be asking you to show up for some of those in the next session.
Yeah, we can do that. We can. I'm just thinking about where to place it, and I can, we have to add it now since you guys are approving tonight. So I'm just looking here. I mean, the anti-racist education obviously fits well under racial equity in education. The civics doesn't fit the same way, and I don't want to get too into the weeds here, but maybe we just put it under there.
What if we ask you to include that and then trust you and Andrew with the Intergovernmental Committee to find the right place for that? Is that a workable? Okay. So I think we need to get the motion before us so we can continue discussing. Do I have a motion and a second to adopt resolution 6220, Portland Public Schools 2021 legislative agenda?
Yeah, and I'm going to hopefully save us a step. I'm going to make a motion to adopt the legislative agenda with the amendment that was just discussed to add a bullet. Hey, Courtney, could you spell out what that exactly was?
Transformative curriculum and pedagogy.
Yeah, the system shift is around transformative curriculum and pedagogy, but the specifics we can nail down the wordsmith part.
Okay, so adopt this with that change.
All right, so Director Scott moves. Do I have a second?
Second.
Director DePass seconds. The adoption of resolution 6220 with the proposed amendment. Is there any further board discussion?
Scott's trying to talk, but we can't hear him.
Sorry, we can't hear him. Okay. I don't have my camera on. I have my script on. Scott?
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay, sorry. Was there anything the committee considered but decided not to include?
Yeah, there was an item that we had on there initially about the budget. What's the budget acronym, Andrew?
CSL.
Well, we do have the CSL, right?
We do have CSL in there.
No, it wasn't that one. I'm sorry. The TSCC.
Oh yeah, right.
Asked us to include a bullet to advocate to remove that requirement, and there were some good conversations with her about, and with others here, about why it was probably not a battle that we should be taking on this session. So we removed it, and I think it was the right call. But other than that, I don't recall anything else being removed.
All right, any further discussion? All right, Ms. Bradshaw, is there any public comment?
No.
All right, the board will now vote on Resolution 6220, Portland Public Schools 2021 Legislative Agenda. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Are there any abstentions? Resolution 6220 is approved by a vote of 7-0, with Student Representative Shu voting
Yes.
right. Now we move on to the legislative agenda for Oregon School Board Association, and Oregon School Board Association, or OSBA as we normally refer to it, is organized as one general state association that supports 14 geographic regions. Tonight we are voting on a resolution to adopt the OSBA 2021-2022 legislative priorities and principles as recommended by their Legislative Policy Committee. Director Moore, as a member of OSBA's Legislative Policy Committee, would you like to say a few words about this before we vote?
Yeah, just a very few words. So the Legislative Policy Committee for OSBA, along with the OSBA Board of Directors, has been working on this legislative policy agenda for about 18 months. They at the end of every legislative biennium, they work up a new agenda. So this has had really a tremendous amount of work that's gone into it. It reflects, I think, a growing recognition by OSBA that it needs to champion racial equity work in this state. OSBA is undergoing some pretty significant changes, mostly in the direction of racial justice and social equity. OSBA, for those of you who don't know, OSBA is the the voice for school boards across the state. It includes K-12 and community colleges and education service districts. The legislative policy agenda is intended to be fairly high level to give direction to the OSBA lobbyists on how legislative priorities for the organization, but also how they should respond to any kind of legislative initiatives that come up. Same sort of thing that Courtney does, like we're giving general direction. I would strongly recommend that the PPS board adopt the OSBA agenda. Thanks.
All right, do I have a motion on the OSBA agenda?
So moved.
Do I have a second? Okay, so I heard Director Scott move adoption of the OSBA, or I don't know if it's adoption. Yeah, adoption of the OSBA 2021-2022 legislative priorities and principles. And I heard a second, but I didn't see who it was. Who seconded that?
Constam.
Constam, thank you. Sorry, I flip back between my screens with the script and the Zoom, and I don't always catch people. All right. Is there any board discussion on the OSBA principles and priorities?
One quick thing, which Rita, I'm going to put this on your plate, is one of the items on here is it says workforce shortages, and there is a line on there that talks about diverse workforce, but if I were back in the sausage making, I would have used that piece to beef up the values around training a diverse workforce in this state, because OSBA could be a player in that arena, working with our institutions of higher ed and teacher training programs. So it's couched in there enough to make me think that's what they intend, but go out there and beef it up.
All right, any other discussion?
Yeah, I had just a comment. So having served my previous life on the OSBA board, I will say that I think there has been a measurable improvement in its statewide priorities. The one thing I just want to call out that it was always an issue for me before, because how it has been used historically, is the support local governance and oppose mandates. And just concerned that often like local control becomes a way in which discriminatory behavior is like, this is our context and you guys can do what you want and we're going to do what we want. So I'm concerned about that reference that becomes sort of the holy grail. And I know that in the last meeting that the Intergovernmental Committee had, it was great to hear from a diverse cross-section of elected leaders from other jurisdictions about the Reimagine Oregon legislation. And when asked about sort of the potential opposite, which I was really excited about their legislative agenda, but when asked about what could be barriers to a broader agenda, it's this, hey, if Portland wants to do that, go ahead and do that. But in our community, we don't want to do that. So I'm going to vote for this, but I want our legislative agenda to always, if it's in conflict with OSBA's, I want ours to trump, because I think it better reflects our values. So.
All right, Director Bailey, we have 2 minutes left.
There's under the financial section, it talks about cost containment. And in the past, that has meant OSBA trying to cut benefits for workers. Is that still the context that they're talking about here?
Sadly, I have to say that I think that remains an approach that OSBA embraces. But
I think by saying cut benefits, do you mean PERS reform? Because they don't lobby for individual districts, decision making within individual districts regarding employee benefits.
Well, the way they talk about it, it's the costs associated with healthcare and retirement, which to me says PERS without saying PERS. The costs associated with healthcare
there's also
upfront about PERS.
There's also health insurance issues. Where haven't they tried to push us into more of a statewide benefit program that would have cost us money?
I guess I would just ask, and I'm new to this process, new to the OSBA, that, I mean, you're talking about larger context that you have, which I'm sure is real, but the language itself seems less innocuous. It seems innocuous. The costs associated with healthcare and retirement benefits are eating into funding available for instructional opportunities for students. I think that's factually true. That doesn't necessarily mean that we should be cutting the costs and benefits, but it means that the way the system is set up, there is less and less funding for frontline, teaching and students, and that OSBA will promote legislation that provides relief for districts related to benefits costs controlled by the state, which also sounds innocuous to me.
Okay, I think my sort of understanding of our relationship with OSBA is we very much appreciate a lot of the great work they do, like with the Student Investment Account Act and the work that they're doing to continue to evolve. And I think we also recognize that in some ways we are, I think was that Director Brim Edwards that said our legislative priorities should always be where we lead from, and that we support this, and we enjoy being part of OSBA, and we know that we're not always 100% in sync.
You avoided.
Are we ready for that?
Which is Trump's.
Trump. I did not say the word Trump. I've been trying to remove it from my language because people react very strongly when you say it these days. So, especially my mother, who is not a U.S. citizen. So, anyway, let's go ahead and vote on the motion before us.
So I just want to put out, Andrew, I agree the language may be innocuous, but that is not the history of OSBA. So I want to flag that, at least informally, as something to watch, that we don't get pulled in on saying that we support measures that really directly impact. I mean the pension available now for new state workers is pretty meager, and that's how PERS reform has been carried out. And I don't want us being part of that process, but in support of that process. So I want us to be careful in terms of how that actually might be carried out this session.
So can I just say, OSBA is a coalition. And as with any coalition, not every participant in the coalition is going to be 100% behind every
Understood.
element. I think it's a question of institutional relationships. And we have just passed our own legislative agenda. And everyone knows that PPS has its own legislative agenda. We are an independent actor who also participates in a coalition. And it is to our benefit to maintain a good relationship with that coalition, not only because we can leverage their collective power, but we can also, and we have, I think, been a force to promote the evolution of the organization.
All right, so I'm going to ask us, do we think we're ready to vote on this item? All right, I'm seeing some nodding.
Yep.
Okay, all in favor of adopting the OSBA 21-22 legislative priorities and principles, please indicate by saying yes.
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 All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Are there any abstentions? All right, the OSBA legislative priorities and principles are adopted by a vote of 7-0 with Student Representative Shu voting.
Yes.
All right, is there any other business at this time before we adjourn to our study session? All right, seeing none, I will remind folks that the next regular meeting of the board will be held on January 12th. This meeting is adjourned and we wish you all a peaceful and safe rest of the new year. Next, we will move into our board work session to review and hear about, I think it's our health curriculum tonight. So let's all take a 3-minute break and come back to that session at 9:14. See you all in a few.
Some family business I need to attend to, so I probably won't be joining until about 9:30.
Okay.